Impressionist Painting Water Lilies with Mr. G. Okay, starting out today, one of the things that a lot of painters do before they paint is they like to draw out their painting. So they can kind of paint it. Just like when you're coloring, sometimes it's nice to, when you have a coloring book, you have images that you can color. So it's kind of the same way with artists doing paintings. They want to have reference as to where things are. Sometimes they actually use paintbrush. Sometimes they'll use pencils or markers. What I'm doing here, of course, is just a pencil. Now what we're utilizing here as I draw these lily pads is we're creating the illusion of depth by using size. So the smaller an object is, the further it is away in this case. And that's true of a lot of things. If you look at telephone poles that are going away from you, you know that they're the same size, but they look like they're getting smaller as they're further away. So that's what we're doing with the lily pads here, is they're starting a little bit big in the front, that's the bottom, and then we go smaller and smaller going away. These can be completely randomized. You can choose however many you want. Maybe you only want 4 or 5, but I like to have a little bit of depth in there. And then the next thing that I'm doing is I'm just kind of deciding the placement of a couple of the water lilies, the lily flowers anyways. Deciding where they're going to be. I'm not going by the painting that's up in the right corner there. I'm just kind of going what I want to do myself. I want it to be my own painting. So you do the same thing with yours. This is again just going to be an impression of the idea of lily pads and these little water lilies on the water there. So now we have all that taken care of. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put down some paint for the watercolor. Not like the watercolor painting, but the color of the water, which is just a reflection of the sky. So I'm going to use a blue, I'm going to use a black, and I'm also going to use a white. And I'm just going to mix those into different levels, different shades of blue by using these 3 colors, these 3 paints. So I'm going to dab just a little bit of black out there, a little bit of blue out there. And then I'm just going to do some just kind of back and forth rocking with my brush, just really lightly. I'm doing this really lightly right now, and what that's doing is that's just putting on the first little bit of a layer on your painting, because when we do impressionist painting, we work in layers, but it doesn't mean that we're just going to cover the whole thing in one color. We're going to do little dabs here and there, and you're going to notice that sometimes when you push down a little bit harder, you're going to get maybe a darker color, and when you do it lighter, just like in a pencil or color pencil, you'll get a lighter color if you're not as light. Now I added just a little tiny bit of water to this, not a whole lot. I just noticed that if I used no water at all, it got a little bit too dark, and I was a little bit worried about that black overpowering the blue. So that's why I added a little bit of water there. So what I'm doing is I'm just filling in these spaces all around the lily pads, just probably like you would do when you were coloring. But notice that it's not really perfect. It's not very smooth around the sides of the lily pads. I'm going to fill that space in later with even more different kinds of blue, different shades of blue. So we'll speed this up so you can kind of see how it works. Now if you just take a minute to look at the painting so far while I'm doing this, you'll notice there's many, many different shades of blue, and that's just using the blue and the black together. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add just a little bit of white to that, so I can add even another shade of blue on there. Add a little dab of white, and what that's going to do is it's going to give me a lighter blue. It's going to maybe more reflective of the sky, if the sky was blue up there. And even if I get a little bit too white, sometimes that's okay, because you never know what those reflections are all about. Plus, this is an impressionist style painting. Once again, when we look at an impressionist style painting, you'll notice that it's a lot of just little tiny paint blobs pushed together. Look at the different colors that there even are. There's some purple in there. There's some red in the water. So these things don't have to be perfect or very realistic. You have different blobs of paint. And that's what the Impressionists use. So if you squint your eyes, you can see it. But once you get closer up, sometimes it's indistinguishable. You can't quite tell what things might be. It's very interesting to zoom in on these pieces of painting, these artworks. Now I'm going to put down a little bit of green. Just notice how much green I put down, and I think that I realized later that I put way too much green down there. I'm also going to use yellow, so we're going to put that down as well. So I'm going to mix a little bit of the yellow in with the green to start out with, because I think that green is just too generic. It's too basic. But if I add a little bit of a yellow to it, it's a little bit closer to what I think a lily pad color will be. And so with these, I'm probably going to fill them in just a little bit of full color instead of that Impressionist start. Then I'll continue on to add a little bit of yellow to these just to see what the contrast will be, what it'll look like. So finish that one up, and then I'll probably dab a little bit of yellow onto here to see what that looks like. And then we'll continue on doing the same thing throughout the rest of the painting. So we'll speed it up. You can see that at times I'll add that yellow in there, and you see I kind of just dab it in there. It doesn't necessarily need to be specific. Once again, it's this Impressionist. And then what I'm going to do is add a little bit of dark. I'll add a little bit of black or blue to this to give a darker green. And then I'm just going to add that to probably the bottom of each lily pad to give it a little bit of diversity in color and tone. And finally, under the lily pad section, I'm going to add a little bit of a shadow of sorts. It's either going to be kind of a reflection or a shadow. But in order to separate it from the water just a little bit, we're going to add just a little tiny bit of a shadow just by mixing some greens and a little bit of black underneath there and diluting it. That means adding some water so it's not really dark. You want to be careful not to do it straight black, or else it might look a little bit weird. And I'll continue to do that on all the rest of them. And you can keep this in mind as far as how many lily pads you want to put in there, because then you'll know how many shadows you need to put in there as well. And finally, I'm going to put some red down to start off with the lily pads. I experimented with a bunch of different colors, and I recommend that you don't go with the red and the blue together, because it did not make a good enough of a purple for me. If you have purple, I'm just using the very basic colors that I gave you guys to get in class. If you have purples, you can mix the purples with some white. It would probably get a really nice color. This just did not work out as well as I had hoped it had. This is the second one that I did, and the first one I did was just red and was just white. So notice how I'm making these petals. I'm just grabbing from the bottom and I'm kind of pushing up. And then I'll mix the colors just a little bit more, add a little bit more white to give it some more tonality, perhaps some highlights. And you can kind of see I'm just flicking it up. Flick, flick. And I'll do that with the rest of them too. And I'll probably choose a couple different colors as well. Remember, the layering of these flowers can start dark, and then you can add light on top of that. And then it tends to work out really nicely. So we'll speed the rest of this up, finishing up these water lilies, adding a couple different ones with red, turning that into pink. And then finally, I'm going to fill in these little spots with a lighter blue and some white, add that on there. And finally, just adding little tiny dots here and there to give that Impressionist style. And then we gently take off the masking tape. This is sped up, so do yours really slowly. And there we have the final product. Thanks for watching.